Hey guys, and welcome to episode 2 of the best and worst of indie books, where I give my opinions on some of the greatest and not so great indie books that I've read recently. And this one is a doozy. Now, last time I started with the worst and went to the best because I believe that videos should always end on the best so that the viewer walks away with a good feeling. However, the worst book requires some trigger warnings, so I'm going to start with the best and end with the worst and hope that it doesn't leave a sour taste in your mouth like it did mine. So, the best for this round is Until the End of the World by Sarah Lyons Fleming. This was a hopeful twist on the apocalypse, where our main character, Cassie, has basically not been making the best decisions in her life. After the death of her parents, she kind of loses herself. Breaks up with the love of her life, Aiden, starts dating a guy she really doesn't even like, gives up the art she used to love, basically starts living her life on autopilot and can't really shake herself out of it. A couple of years later, the apocalypse breaks out. Now, what I really liked about this book is that it wasn't just post-apocalypse, it was mid-apocalypse. Whereas most apocalypse books tend to drop you after everything's already gone and there's already zombies everywhere, and you're like, well, how on earth did we get here? Until the End of the World starts from the middle. So you see the characters at work and their regular lives, and they're planning on going out for a drink. And then things deteriorate rapidly with this new virus that's just messing everything up. And I liked that. That's not something you usually see. It also has a very great group dynamic. Cassie is there with work friends and her siblings, and actually ends up breaking up with the guy she was dating that she didn't really love, but he tags along anyway. But it's much less about how horrible the world is, although that is a big thing. They are fighting what are essentially zombies, although they're so rarely called that in the book, though this is a world where zombies actually do exist in the media lexicon. It's very much hopeful in a weird way. For Cassie, her parents were doomsday preppers. So for her, it's a way to connect back to her parents and essentially use everything they taught her and live on through their legacy using all the tools and tricks they taught her in the case of the end of the world. She ends up going to the cabin that they used to live at that she hasn't been to in years because it has these giant, stocks of canned food and all of that. And she brings the bug out bag that her father told her to carry all the time. And so it's a weird way of her kind of reconnecting. And also, she discovers that the love of her life, Aiden, is actually running one of the biggest safe zones, one of the places where people are essentially congregating at a farm to survive and fend off zombies. And so a big part of it is her trying to get to him and essentially trying to make up for past mistakes. In a weird way, Cassie is using the end of the world to better her own life, oddly enough. And this very great group dynamic. All of the people in the group from he's gay, but he's not stereotypical because he's still like a southern good old boy. He still played football, but he's gay, and his name, I believe his given name is Nelson, but she calls him Nellie, and I love it. To the romance between Penny and James, to the redemption arcs. I am a sucker for a redemption arc, and multiple characters have one in this. And it's basically about people banding together and overcoming the end of the world rather than being drowned by it. I mentioned this before in my Yule Witchathon vlog, but the ending is very, very succinct. It's very, not totally final. There are still some characters left up in the air. You don't know what happens to Cassie's brother, for example. You're not sure if he made it or not, or Penny's mother. There are some characters that are important that aren't really there, but it felt final enough for me. It might be a case where if I get the urge to go back into that world or back into that writing style, I might jump back into it. But there's not really I must get the next book. Mostly because there wasn't a cliffhanger, and I was really waiting for one. Like, you're reading the first book of a series, and it's a zombie apocalypse, and they've just made it to the safe zone. So I kept waiting for the Walking Dead-esque, oh no, the zombies have broken the gate or something. I kept waiting for that last, like, oh no, and it didn't come. Which, I don't fault anyone for that, but it almost kind of felt like a standalone to me, which is why I'm not necessarily going to continue the series, even though I really, really liked the book. I've never read a post-apocalypse that made me feel so hopeful before. Most of the time, I have to give up reading that kind of stuff after a long period of time because I just get too depressed. But this book was definitely about that. And I read a little bit of Sarah Lyons Fleming's bio, and she is a little bit of a prepper herself. So I thought that was cute that she put in a little bit of her own hobbies into the book and made it this big thing. Because let's be honest, if there is a zombie apocalypse, the preppers are going to own all of us. The preppers are going to be the ones sitting pretty, and we're going to be upset that we called them silly for so long. But definitely like it. I believe most of the books that Sarah Lyons Fleming have written is doomsday. Essentially, it is mostly zombies fiction, which I know isn't in vogue as much anymore, at least in the world of literature. But I would definitely suggest her if you like that kind of genre, or if you're tired of that kind of genre and you want to see someone do it differently. I definitely haven't read many post-apocalypse like what she has, and it was an incredibly refreshing take. Now, from the book I really liked, it was full of hope and optimism and good feelings. Now we're at the next book. Here is the trigger warning. I have teased this in multiple videos now, and the trigger warning is this book involves blatant acts of sexual assault and rape. Yes, they are fully described as they happen in the act. Now, quick disclaimer. I am not totally against the idea of including such acts in literature in general. I am a huge believer that books and other pieces of art should reflect the world around them and explain something about the world. And those things happen in real life. And so I'm not against them being included as valid, horrible parts of the human condition. That's not what upsets me that they're in here in general. It upsets me that the way it's used. So the book for this one that I really don't like is Fearless Leader by Trisha Owens. I was really excited to find that I had this book on my Kindle. It was one of the ones I downloaded en masse from BookBub, so I had no idea. And when I realized that I had an LGBT romance on my Kindle, or rather my Nook, I was so excited. I thought, great, I've been wanting to read more diversely. I have it right here. I'm pretty sure I didn't have to pay anything for it. It's great. And I decided to include it in December. Now, Fearless Leader is the beginning of a series, kind of a futuristic cyberpunk, revolving around this juxtaposed city, which is a rundown, drug, crime-fueled, not quite dystopia, but not very far above it. It's a city where there are people with supernatural abilities called psypaths that can either read your mind or your emotions, but they get easily overwhelmed and have to use this drug called Bliss to essentially mute out the world, and they get addicted to it. Our main character, Black, who is only ever known as Black, essentially leads this task force in trying to take the drug off the streets. In doing so, he is introduced to, I believe, a male prostitute called Calix, who is an empath who can read emotions and is essentially helping them track down other drug users. He's essentially been forced into this. Now, wasn't too bad to start out with. I realized going in, there is literally one female character in the entire book. And it is an unnamed mistress of a drug lord that you never hear speak. And that is the only female that shows up on any page. So, there's that. And the other issue I had as I was reading for most of it is the male-to-male relationships felt very fetishized. In that they were all men, and 90% of the men, of course, were all hot, were all Adonises with mostly long hair, and they were all kind of attracted to each other, and a ton of people were sleeping with each other. And I couldn't quite decide whether or not I felt this was fetishized until I sat down and I thought to myself, okay, if a male author was writing this about lesbian relationships, would I be okay with this? And the answer was no. It definitely felt like these male-to-male relationships were much more for the female readers than it was for the actual sake of diversity or showing a genuine gay romance. So that was kind of iffy to begin with. But honestly, I probably could have let it go, because you can always make the argument that in most romance-centric books, there's always a little bit of fetishizing. Like, really, any smut book with sex scenes could be considered for the sake of the fetish. So it didn't totally put me off. There was also the issue of there wasn't a lot of action, considering the fact that it was supposed to be a police force taking down drug dealers. You really thought there would have been more action to it, and there really wasn't. But all in all, I was, it's kind of whatever. Not the best, but, I was so excited to have an LGBT romance, I thought I can make it work. And then comes the moment near the end where, let me think of how to say this. The police captain is the villain of the story, more or less. He's corrupt. He's basically using Calix's services, and at one point asks Calix to come to his hotel room, and there he rapes him. That is not the scene I'm talking about, actually. It's not in too deep detail. Like, it's half descriptive of the event and then, like, skips ahead. That was bad enough, but, and the way I justified it as I was reading it, is that the police captain is very clearly the villain. This is very clearly a heinous act, and Calix even swears vengeance upon him in a way. So you know that, this is very clearly framed as in, this guy is horrible, this thing is horrible, it's all horrible. And that was, it wasn't okay, but it was, you know what I mean. It was verisimilitude. It made sense in the context. You find out that the reason the police captain did that was essentially to force Black, the main character, to feel sympathy for Calix in some weird way. Because he wants Calix and Black to essentially fall in love, because he wants Calix to ferret out some secret about Black that you never really find out in this book. I'm assuming you find out in another one, but I'm not going to continue. The worst moment came after that. Black comes to pick Calix up immediately after the first sexual assault, and I say first for a reason. And when he sees Calix very obviously looking like a victim, he's kind of Solomon Stone-faced. This makes Calix fly into a rage, and he starts beating up on him. In the middle of beating up on him, Calix, and who is supposed to be essentially falling in love with Black at this point. That's the whole point of the book. It's the romance. It's the romance of the genre. Decides that Black's not having a big enough reaction to him having just been raped. So he's going to rape him instead, to force a reaction out of him. Now, as I mentioned before, Calix is an empath. He feels emotions. He can feel Black's disgust, his terror, his pain. At one point, he burns himself on the tailpipe of a bike trying to get away. None of that stops him. The only thing that stops him is the fact that he can't get an erection to actually do the act. And you read this in graphic detail. You read Calix deciding he's going to do this, yanking down Black's pants, Black fighting, trying to get away. You read all of it. And this character is supposed to be the protagonist. He's supposed to be falling in love with this other man while he is attempting to rape him. What do you even say? And this happened maybe 20 pages from the end of the book. And not 10 pages later, they have a big blow up with the big baddie, the big side path, whatever. It's pointless. It's not the big reason why this is the worst. It's hardly brought up again at all. And I like, never read that kind of thing in a book before. Not between what are supposed to be the romantic couple. You're supposed to root for Calix. You're supposed to, like, pity him, and he tries that. You're supposed to want these two to get together. I never want these two to get together, ever. And there's no consequence in the end of the book. There's no, I don't think they really even talk about it besides one or two exchanged sentences. Because like I said, this happened like 20 pages before the end. Yeah, there's every chance that this is brought up in another book and they talk about it, but I don't want to keep reading. You can't give me this protagonist having to do something that bad, not bring it up again, and trust that people are going to want to see the relationship move forward. You know, we always talk about toxic relationships in romance novels and how there's a ton of them, and there are. I've never seen one as blatantly, horribly, abusively toxic as that before the relationship even begins. I mean, the beginning part is usually, you know, before the demons are revealed, back when they're just flirting. This, I can't even formulate how much I am shocked and disgusted by what happened in this book. And that's why it's my worst. And that's why I have struggled to talk about it on any other thing, because the sexual assault scenes, especially the one that Calix does against Black, is in detail. It's not, you know, like in some cases where they talk about sexual assault scenes and they only talk about how, like, the victim tried very hard to be far away and that's the end. You don't actually see anything else. No, like, you read about how he couldn't get it up to commit this horrible act against the man that is literally burning himself trying to get away. You read that in depth. And these two are supposed to be falling in love. Like, So, this is the worst book. This is the worst book ever that I have read 2018, that I have read of indie books. I mean, I gave Goliath by Richard Turner in the last episode a bit of a working over. I can forgive poor writing. I can't forgive this kind of shit. No. This is the worst. This is the 1 star. And I usually don't give 1 stars to a book that I can finish. If I can suffer through and get to the end of the book, it's a 2-star minimum, like Goliath was. This, no. 1 star. I'd give it negative stars if that was possible. I went to Amazon for in December and gave it a 1 star and talked about how it was basically angsty, rapey, yaoi, hentai for women. Like, so, to it. Not a fan of this book. Would not suggest it. Not going to read anything else by the author. It looks like male romances are mostly what she writes, but if this is how she's going to treat those male romances, I want nothing to do with it. And like I said, I usually would have started the video with this book so I could end on the super happy, positive, optimistic post-apocalypse. But for the sake of people who don't want to watch or hear about that kind of stuff, for whom those trigger warnings are intended, I had to leave it like this. Now, I have read some other great books, and there will be more other great books coming in the series. I'm having so much fun. I have recently gotten to buy a bunch of indie books using Amazon gift cards that I got for Christmas, so be on the lookout for a giant indie book haul, and I'm super excited for that. So, in short, 1 fantastic book that made me feel hopeful, 1 horrible, god-awful book that made me sick to my stomach. Proof that indie books run the gambit as much as any other book. They are still valid. I still love them. Some of them just never should see the light of day again. With that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.